about what Independent Media Week is. And we celebrate Independent Media Week every year in April. We've done this will be the 13th year that folks have been gathering, and primarily these are folks in our community, folks that are producing media, all of our great, including KSKQ, our community radio station, our wealth of independent newspapers and blogs, and all the amazing channels we do to get the information out. And to talk about Independent Media Week, we really got to step back a few more years to the Battle of Seattle in 1999, and the struggles with the world. There were many protests of the World Trade Organization happening in Seattle and Portland, and a lot of activists were being frustrated because we were having a really hard time in those days getting information out about the work we're doing, about finding, getting information about our events, promoting our concerts and our actions, things like what we're gathering here today. We weren't able to buy media space in the papers or the radio, then people just couldn't hear about it. But then there was this amazing thing called the internet that was really taking off. And so folks, the activists were able to use those resources and create indie media networks, which were able to share information. And for the first time, you saw the balance tipping, where the information that people were getting over the internet was more accurate and faster than what people were getting over the TV and the radio, the mainstream media. So look forward to this phenomenon continue to grow, and certainly inspired me. In my work, I work with KSKQ. I'm the station manager at our community radio station. And also we have published the Rogue Valley Community Press, which is a local newspaper dedicated to social justice causes. And Independent Media Week is celebrated here in Ashland. 13 years ago, the city was recognized for an investment. They've been investing greatly in their infrastructure, like the fiber network that we use for our AFN. At the same time, the city was also taking bold steps in making the city process more accountable, more by filming and making the meetings, public meetings, available to us all through this network. And so they came together 13 years ago and kind of the city congratulated themselves with a pat on the back, declaring the week in April as Independent Media Week. And their proclamation that they came with is a quick one. I'll read it. But it basically says that a well-informed citizenry is a cornerstone of our democracy, and that an informed citizenry depends on an objective, responsible, and unrestrained press, which provides greater access to accurate information, more points of view, and greater diversity of thought and fact. The trend towards the consolidation of media ownership has resulted in fewer media voices, which can cause a homogenized message and a lack of variety in point of view. And finally, democratic principles support the case for more independent media in this country with many editorial points of view. So the City Council and the Mayor 13 years ago, on behalf of the cities, proclaimed the week Independent Media Week, encouraging all of the citizens to seek out and explore all of our diverse independent media that's available to our community. And when we talk about independent media, we should really be talking about Community Media Week, because this is really where, the folks that are creating media that is relevant and important and factual to all of us. And so we've held them to it, and we've had the city reclaim every year since then Independent Media Week. And also we've even gone as far as to have it read in the state legislature. And so we honor this week for all the folks that create media. And we have a panel here today that of folks that are going to speak on this subject, local media representatives, to talk about creating a culture of peace in this new era, this era of Trumpism, the alternative facts and fake news, and how that influences our community. And so we've got a nice distinguished panelists. I'm going to have to need help with some of the introductions, of course. of course, David Wick, the HCPC, are going to be helping to facilitate our talk with our guests on Skype. And we've got Jeff Golden, of course, who's been the host of Immense Possibilities on public radio and now on Oregon Public Broadcasting, and of course the self-publishing and kind of showing what we can do with our media to capture an audience. And Bert Etling, editor of the Daily Tidings, and he's done a really amazing job making our corporate paper back into a community paper too. And so we value that. And then of course Hannah Jones, the publisher of the Siskiyou, my alma mater, which used to be right across the hall there, down here in the basement. And so it's really my honor, my privilege to be seated at this table. So I'm going to stop talking. Let Chris get
Well, I'm David Wick, Executive Director of the Ashland Culture of Peace Commission. And I'm personally delighted, both for the organization, Ashland Culture Peace Commission, but also personally to be here. And I thank Bert for having the bright idea and saying, let's do that. And we always say, yeah, let's do that. And joining with Jason with this wonderful lineage that we've done here. And the overarching view is about media and the culture of peace. What is that, and what does that mean, in particular in this era, where there's so much tumult happening around the world, but also around in the media sector. So just to give you a bit of a background around the Ashland Culture Peace Commission, I've been working with the International Day of Peace and the idea of the culture of peace for many, many years. And being here in Ashland, we said, yes, let's really ground what a culture of peace is and what that means in a community, in a city. And what we used to begin with was work that's been done in the United Nations, and I'm so delighted to introduce to you in a moment David Adams, who's been he's been one of the pillars of the culture of peace at the United Nations and around the world, and I'll introduce you here in a moment. And then the other part was with Pathways to Peace, an organization that I've been part of since 1980. But Pathways to Peace used this model, this image, as all sectors of the community are parts of a pathway to peace, or parts of a culture of peace. And so we used this as kind of the foundation for developing the Ashland Culture of Peace Commission, which was blessed by the City Council in 2015. And so this is basically our mission statement. The Ashland Culture of Peace is a community-wide movement dedicated to transforming our attitudes, behaviors, institutions into ones that foster harmonious relationships with each other and the natural world. So it's really about relationships. And you really come down to it. You think about our lives and our institutions and everything else, and what's really at core is a relationship. Relationship with each other, but so many different ways of looking at relationship. And so much of that comes to understanding and communication. So what we're talking about here is on one is mass communication, is what we're talking about. So it's beyond the one-on-one communication, but it's how do we communicate on a much broader level, and both locally with this wonderful panel, but also internationally. And that's where David Adams comes in. So I want to introduce David. He's in New Haven, Connecticut. And again, David's been one of those key people that really sparked the idea of the culture of peace, moving it into real actuality. So David, tell us a bit about yourself. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you. Is my voice coming across okay?
Very good.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, very good. Well, I'm really here in three capacities. One is in terms of independent media. I run an independent media on the internet called the Culture of Peace News Network. It's the opposite of CWN. It's called CPNN. You can look it up on the internet to CPNN. It's the opposite of CQNN. CWNN is usually shortened to CNN. CNN, somewhere down in Atlanta, has a department, like all newspapers have an obituary department that prepares obituaries for all the people that may die. One in Atlanta, they have a war department which prepares the backgrounds for all possible wars that could break out. So the minute a war comes out, CNN has a whole history. That's the Culture of Wars Network. Well, the Culture of Peace News Network tells you what's happening in the culture of peace in the world, and that's all. So that's one thing. A second hat is that I was one of the founders at UNESCO in the 90s of the Culture of Peace program at UNESCO, later the International Year for the Culture of Peace of the UN system. And so I can tell you something about that. And third hat is that in the 1980s in New Haven, we founded a peace commission. And I'm a peace commissioner. And this evening I was at the Board of Education testifying for the Peace Commission. So we have that in common also. And I guess we'll have a chance to talk more about that. At some point, I should tell you a little bit more about the Culture of Peace concept as of the UNESCO.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. I'm delighted, like I said, for you to be here. So why don't we just, so I'm going to assist, moderating. So why don't we just go ahead and go down the line with you say hello and start off.
To me. Hello, welcome. Really glad to be here. Very much glad that we are recognizing and dialoguing around an independent media week. We'd be in much deeper trouble than we already are if we didn't have independent media in this country. I have 2 points I want to make tonight, and am likely to make them with different words several times when I have the opportunity. The first is that our challenges are very deep challenges with regard to media in this country. Did not begin on January 20th, 2017. They would be fundamentally very much the same if the election had had a different outcome. Now, I don't want to underestimate how unusual and severe the antagonism of the Trump administration to the media is. I mean, it's of all the things, I'm struck that it can be difficult to really understand what's being said by this administration, in part because we hear so many astonishing things and have for so long that we need to try and stay awake and stay aware. But when an administration is telling us that the media is the enemy of the people, and that it's time for the media to keep its mouth shut and just listen. We are being told by an administration that we refuse to be accountable for what we do. And we are trying to discredit the only means you have of knowing what we do, because we don't have to defend what you don't know about. So that is new. That is unprecedented. But the structure of media and the way that it has turned from having a very strong public service component to being an enormously lucrative commodity in the last 50 years is a problem, and something that we have to continue to point out and educate ourselves about. I hope to talk a little bit more about that later. I think there's some misunderstanding about that end of the equation. The other is that a media outlet or a journalist who really manifests a culture of peace may not appear very peaceful in the moment. And this is a puzzle that we're still trying to figure out. The media is grappling with its role, the responsible media, and I have enormous respect for many people involved in the media. I have a couple of them on either side of me, and I know some nationally who I think are in journalism for exactly the right reasons and are fighting hard for this country, are true patriots. But they may not seem like the most peaceful people in the world. And I think we have to really examine what peacefulness is and what a culture of peace is, because it can entail, and we have the historical examples of the icons that we go back to again and again, Martin Luther King, and Nelson Mandela, and Gandhi, and just a handful of others, who have stood up quite willingly to challenge, to speak truth to power, and to engage in conflict. Now, the nature of that conflict and how you characterize the problem in the world, that can be more or less peaceful. But I think the measurement of a journalist who's manifesting the culture of peace isn't so much necessarily in his disposition at the time, because some of the journalists in this new culture of peace are going to have to be competitive and have to be warriors for our rights. But it needs to be measured in whether or not, what kind of society and culture and government they are fostering down the line, or making possible down the line. And those who defend our rights and insist on truth while being characterized as enemies of the people are probably doing a more valuable job building a future of a culture of peace than those who are laying down because they don't want to cause too much of a fuss. So those would be my two takeaways for the evening that I hope we have a chance to elaborate on. Culture of peace journalists may not look peaceful in the moment, and we have a problem that predates Donald Trump by many, many years. Thank you for coming, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
So again, I'm Bert. I'm the editor of the Ashland Daily Tidings. Prior to that, I've edited 2 other community newspapers, and my gig is community news. And I'm really glad to be in Ashland. It's a great newspaper town, and it deserves a great newspaper, and that's what I'm trying to do here.
I would say yes.
They talk about all news being local, and it really is. It's like that famous New Yorker cartoon where here's the buildings of New York, and then you look off in the distance and over the river and this little tiny sliver of everywhere else. That goes for any town. We see the Varsity Theater and SOU, and then things diminish off into the distance, at least in my community newspaper eyes. So that's me. I'm currently working for a company, it's kind of squishy because we've been purchased, but the new owner hasn't taken over yet. So for a few years now, about 5 years ago, we were purchased from Murdoch newspapers, same one as Fox News and Wall Street Journal and all that, which really had nothing to do with editorial content. It's strictly a business thing. It's something about being owned by a corporation as they make their decisions on dollars. They're not so much political, at least not with us. But what they have done, the new owners, Gateway Media, is consolidated all the wire services in Austin, Texas. So the wire pages, the Associated Press, National News that you see, is chosen and assembled by the same team of people that's working on 300, 400 papers from across the U.S. About 180 dailies, and the others are weeklies or less than. So I don't think they're doing anything wrong, but I definitely see a danger there, because it's like, bananas are going to go extinct because there's only one clone. So if one thing comes along and wipes out that crop because it's a monoculture, then you're going to lose that perspective. So I think we're better off with a diversity of news sources, and that's why we celebrate Jason's work in doing this for 13 years now. It's a great thing and an important thing to be doing, and I appreciate your all participation here. So that's the background. The current, I've been on the Culture of Peace Commission for a couple of years now, and I'm trying to think about that in terms of how it relates to my work. as a reporter, you're supposed to report the news, not to be the story. So how much culture of peace do I interject into the newspaper? You know, how do I balance that? Get those values into the paper. So we can talk more about that. And then there's the atmosphere. You know, you've got that general conversation going on about how we go about our business, and then we've got this hurricane going on in Washington, D.C., which is taking all these values that are exact opposite of the culture of peace. They're splitting people up instead of dividing them into interest groups. They're trying to fragment to get religions going against each other and political feelings against each other. And instead of having conversations, we're having arguments. Now, that's nothing new, as Jeff pointed out, but this has been turned up on steroids, as they say. You know, and Trump is trying to frame it as a us versus them thing to kind of degrade what the media says. So it has no standing, but it makes absolutely no sense. The media is no more against Trump. It's there to report the truth. It's no more against Trump than in reporting the weather, it's against the weather. It's like, this weather sucks. But that's because you've got 180 mile an hour winds, you know, that's the weather. And I'm not saying that Trump is, you know, pick your, from a long list of things. It's because it's the truth. It's not because it's us against them. It's because that's what the deal is. And he frames it as us against them, and then, you know, that rallies the supporters and degrades the value of the information, which is another real issue we got going on. So, Dave.
All right, I guess I'm next. So my name's Hannah. I'm the editor of the school newspaper here. And I am also very grateful to be on this panel. This is actually the first time I've really spoken on one of these, so bear with me. As just going off of what they were saying, it's no secret this nation is totally polarized by this election. I mean, even before the Trump era, things were happening. And I feel, as a journalist, I felt more, you know, as I started this, I feel like a watchdog or like a referee kind of. And Trump, I feel, has taken us and thrown us into the game and told us that we're wrong and we're cheating, and now we're in the game with him. And I don't believe that's the case at all. It's not. We are, as long as we're reporting the verifiable truth, we're not in the game. We're not. I don't want to, you know, give in to him and antagonize him. I think going off of personal experience, I mean, I have a dad who's very liberal, married to a French stepmother, and a mom who used to pick me up from school wearing an NRA hat with a "Don't Tread on Me" public sticker on her car. So I realized the importance of really listening to each other's experiences and not just attacking each other, because it is so easy to do. It's easy to just say you're right and he's wrong and then go with it, and you know, next thing you know, we're in this culture of war and hate, and that's not what we're here to talk about. Obviously, we want peace. We want this to create this culture of peace, and I think to do that we need to look at, you know, the causes of structural and cultural conflicts and see, and not just see who's at fault, and really see why things came about to be that way, and listen to each other's experiences and see where we come from. And I think that's the most important part. And especially now, I mean, I feel kind of, you know, at a, I don't want to say crossroads. It's strange, I guess, I'm very young and coming into this industry as a young journalist, and people just keep telling me, oh, good luck. Like, the news industry is dying, good luck with that. And it's definitely not dying, it's changing, but it is cool to be in this generation where I do get very flustered with students who see this. People read fake news and see all this stuff, and I see it all over my Facebook feed, and I get so aggravated. Like, you have to check your sources, you have to do this stuff. That was the first thing I was taught as a journalist, was to, you know, report on the verifiable truth and only do that. So it's interesting to see my generation going through this whole thing of fake news and Trump attacking us, and some of them believing it. And I'm desperately trying to defend myself in that, saying that I am a true journalist, but I think it's not just us journalists, it's everyone that really has to look at their sources and look what they're reading, and, you know, be accountable for what information they're listening to.
Well, that, I'm going to just move this away. You don't need it.
Okay.
So, my thought is, and Bert had a number of things he wanted to really, ask in terms of questions, but I think beginning with Jeff's point around being a media person, you may not be peaceful. What does that mean? And also just to comment that with the Culture and Peace Commission, we're not saying, let's stop all conflict. That's not possible. We're human beings, and there's always going to be edge. There's always going to be difference. And there's always going to be conflict. But it's how we deal with it, how we work together, how we find our way through conflict that's the point. And also, my contention is peace is powerful. It is a powerful entity, powerful force. It's not just sitting by the river, there's a whole lot to that that's kind of like peeling back, as we said, the peace is passeth all understanding. But there's something going on here. So I think it's a very powerful thing. It's not just, it's lullaby lane. But coming to Jeff's point of, you asked the question, and then we'll ask David and all of us to respond. So what's your question, Jeff?
What's my question?
Yeah.
I only have answers. I don't know. Well, can I elaborate a little bit on that point? It seems to me, I think we have plenty of examples in history where the avoidance of conflict, the desire to appear peaceful, has in fact led to the opposite of a culture of peace. So I'm thinking of, it's a complex situation. One thing that comes to mind is how the media so thoroughly, the mainstream media so thoroughly failed in its job during the build-up to the Iraq War and the weapons of mass destruction, where good journalism, and a few good journalists said, there are none. We have no excuse to go to war here to attack this country. This is false. And our major journalistic institutions went along with the story. And I'm sure there were a lot of elements to the calculation to do that. But part of it was not making too much of a fuss, not having a big conflict with the presidential administration. And the results can speak for themselves. Those had those willing to be in conflict with the administration prevailed in the media, we would have avoided a catastrophic war and a really largely destroyed portion of the world right now. And we still don't know how to deal with it. And I'm struck part of the. Now this is a very, very most challenging time in my lifetime for journalism, trying to figure out what their duty is. All of us here were taught about journalistic objectivity, and the form that takes is you get people who disagree with opposing points of view, and give them a voice, and then you folks out there, you figure it out. And don't try to weight it in either direction, because that's not objective, and God knows what you'll be accused of. So the media is really trying to figure out how to deal with this administration. And we're seeing some fascinating debates about whether the word liar is journalistically responsible or not, or you merely go with the word falsehood. So the media is trying, it hasn't escaped this paradigm, which obviously has some value, that on a controversial issue, you want people who disagree to have part of the platform, part of the megaphone, and let news consumers be exposed to those points of view. But we're being tested in a different kind of way. So there are outlets who are saying, we're not going to give much or any ink or airtime to certain points of view about this issue, because they're false, they're demonstrably false. And that's heartening, and it's new, and we've never been here before. We don't know quite what to do with this. So I guess I'll just leave it there, that it takes, I remember being in 5th grade, I spent a year getting bullied, and I was really afraid of a physical fight. I didn't want to get hurt. And I went home and complained and cried. My mother coddled me and comforted me. And my father said, get out there and have your fight. A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a hero dies but one. And it's a little bit, and when you stand up and speak truth to power, you have a greater chance of reestablishing harmonious relations than if you constantly give in to bullying. And there's some resonance for me in what we're up to today.
So I want to move to David on this particular subject again. With peace and the stance of media person. What is your thought about that?
Well, when I was thrown out of the UN, I'll tell you about that, I tried to understand what had happened by writing a book called The History of the Culture of War. And there were two conclusions I came to in writing this history. One is that over the course of thousands of years, the state has come to monopolize the culture of war. In the past, you had tribes that were making wars, you had cities that could make wars, you had outlaw groups that could make wars. Now, the state monopolizes war. Nobody else can make war except the state. That's one conclusion. The second was that in the last century or two, the culture of war, those behind the culture of war, have increasingly turned to the media as their major weapon. Why? Because over the past couple of centuries, the world has had more and more democracy. And if the people run the country in a democracy, they don't want war. People don't want war. So you have to convince the people that war is necessary. You have to have groups like the White Helmets to send you falsified pictures. You have to have, all kinds of, the Gulf of Tonkin. You have to have incidents like the Gulf of Tonkin in order to convince people that you have to go to war. So the media has become a weapon. Now, in the past, of course, is an antidote to that. But let me go back a step and tell you what was thrown out of the UN. It's because we were too successful. As the director of the International Year for the Culture of Peace of the UN system in the year 2000, we mobilized 75 million people to sign up to make it for peace in their communities. 1% of planet Earth. That was too much for the Europeans and the Americans and their allies. Sent in a new program director, UNESCO, came to my office and said, our job is to shut them down. That's the world we live in. The state has become the center of war. It's a very, very dangerous time. Well, we'll get into what we can do about it, how we have information like that in the course of the conversation.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that perspective. He's been there. He knows what's happening. Bert,
Well, to follow up on what Jeff was saying, I have a list here of some of the values that the Culture of Peace Commission endorses, and some of them you'd guess. Bring heart and compassion to conversations, decision-making, and systems. Emphasize values of kindness, generosity, love, and beauty, caring, and curiosity. But there are a couple that align with what we do in journalism. One is seeks larger truths and broader perspectives to better comprehend local and world affairs. I mean, that's what we do. And another, and this is what speaks to Jeff's point, is establish trust through holding all persons responsible for their actions. It's a basic tenet of human resources. To have a workplace that works is that people need to perceive fairness in how people are treated. And that goes whether you're in kindergarten or in a workplace or in the broader society. There's another saying that's no justice, no peace. And well, there's no justice, no peace culture. And one of the things we're fond of saying in journalism is to hold people accountable, speak truth to power. And this all aligns with that. So a culture of peace, I think we're getting that answer. Part of a culture of peace in an era of Trump is to speak up and not back down.
I just wanted to respond to something Hannah said, representing the young journalist on the table, or not. But I was remembering when I went to school here 20-something years ago, that journalism back then was under attack. I mean, I think that the time journalism was I think was right about a used car salesman as far as the trustworthiness of journalism in the 90s, and certainly you know, at the same time I was learning this trade. The investigative journalism departments were being cut, and the news departments were being cut, in all forms of media, and I'm thinking of you know, the two big stories that I remember in the 90s. We had the O.J. Simpson trial and Bill Clinton's sex story. Media spending a lot of time on those two stories and missing a lot of stuff that happened. We had the first Gulf War, and the media never questioned the information that was coming out of you know, when Kuwait was invaded and the alleged throwing of you know, removing of babies from incubators, and even then the media was being manipulated by the powers that be. And it seems that our real crime is that journalists, they just trusted trustworthy sources like the government. They trust Colin Powell, and we trust people when the authorities say, and so we trust them too much. But anyways, I guess my point was that the attack on journalism was, I remember that taking the same, learning it too, it's been happening for a long time.
I would just like to go off of something talking about if the truth is always peaceful, and maybe it's not. I think reporting the truth sometimes can cause more conflicts, but I don't think we can have peace without the truth. So I think it's very important to give voices to the voiceless and make sure everyone is heard and everyone has the truth and all that is heard, and that ultimately does lead to peace.
So how about let's move to a comment or question from anyone out here, and so we can have that dialogue, and then some of the other questions that we have here. So, anyone have one? And if you do, please stand up and speak loudly so David can hear. Yes, please.
My name is Daniel Mark. I am the founder of a new nonprofit organization here in the Valley called Peaceful Interfaith Creations, and I've written a book called In One Spirit, an Interfaith Approach to Peace and Wellness, specifically in Jerusalem, the Middle East, and the world. So my question for you guys, and it's really for all of you, is where does Jerusalem fit into this peace process? I mean, we're living far away from it, but it still affects us here. So that's my question.
Okay, so the question that Ned mentioned about where does Jerusalem fit into the whole peace process of the big scope of things of what's happening?
And specifically here in our local community.
And how it affects local. Yeah, okay.
You know, I wonder if you'd be willing to take the first crack at that. Because I'm sitting here feeling not at all qualified because of my knowledge level about what's going on around Jerusalem. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you for turning back. I do have some ideas on how there can be peace in Jerusalem, a win-win solution for everybody. And it's about sharing Jerusalem. But it involves really getting to know each other, learning more about each other's culture, learning to talk to each other. If we're not comfortable eating together, well, at least we can accept the fact that people need to eat, and they're welcome to eat whatever they want to eat. But there are so many things that people have these kind of prejudiced views on and are not willing to shift that perspective so easily. There's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of prejudice. So I think that to bring people together through playful means initially, music, art, eating, things like that, and gradually build up toward more practical projects, large building projects where we can put people to work, things that we can be proud of. And one of the things that I'm suggesting is a University of Peace to be built in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is a pretty small place. And the old city of Jerusalem in particular is a very tightly walled-in community. So the idea that I have to make this possible is to put a raised platform over the old city. Wherever people want a roof, they can have it, but it would be transparent. So clear light can still come through. People can have shelter from the rain if they want it. If they want open skies, they can still have it. But on top of this platform, there could be a University of Peace.
Great. Okay, thank you. So let me turn to you, David. The question was about Jerusalem and how to, some of the issues there, how that impacts us locally. But it's the question that could go to any place. Then you've done a tremendous amount of work internationally and with many places around the culture of peace. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Of course. Well, first of all, I remember once representing UNESCO in Jerusalem being given a personal guided tour by the official archaeologist of Jerusalem, who took me through all the tunnels in the ancient city. Fascinating place. But in addition to writing, when I left UNESCO, in addition to writing a history of the culture of war, which is, by the way, on my free available on my internet site, along with everything else I've ever written, I wrote a little novella, or novel, which takes place in the year 2026, and which describes how we got to the culture of peace. And one of the key moments in the progression towards the culture of peace comes when Jerusalem becomes an international city shared by all religions. So it symbolizes where we need to go.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, David. So, Bert, another question that you were thinking of for this time.
Did you have something you wanted?
A question.
And speak loudly, please.
My name is Luis Ibanez. Noam Chomsky, I'm sure you know him, wrote Manufacturing Consent, the role of the media into creating one consumer society. Okay. I have a couple of friends who were editors of newspapers, and I remember sharing with me that their biggest concern was their advertisements. Because if your newspaper is part of 300 plus, you said, chain of newspapers, and they of course rely on the business of advertisement, could have any decision in how a newspaper is edited or choose their news?
That's an excellent question, and it's a common one. Before I go on to that, let me just follow up on the Jerusalem thing for a minute. It's like, let's start with the hardest nut to crack, I guess. But we've got a common ground shared by three great world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Muslims. And the problem is, I see it, and this was the same problem in Northern Ireland, where you had Catholics and Protestants, is the objectification of the other, making people into objects instead of human beings. And one of the great roles of journalism is telling stories. It's getting you to emphasize, to identify with other people. And to the extent the work that we do gets people inside other people's heads, it's a step in the direction of finding a better solution for that. On the advertising thing, I'd say about, boy, that really runs the gamut. It's not nearly as common as you think it is. The publications are pretty obvious that do that. There'll be an ad and a story on the same page. None of the papers I've worked with lately has any connection. There's something called the wall, capital T, capital W, between advertising and editorial, the news department. And it just, there's no influence. I remember with the publisher at the last daily, with the weekly I was associated with, was the San Luis Obispo Tribune, and he had been publisher of the Fresno paper, and the Fresno paper, its largest advertiser, was one of the big department stores. And the guy's wife, who ran the department store, was running for the school board. And they didn't endorse her for the election. And they lost all, $50,000 a year. But he said, that's what we got to do. I mean, we're not going to compromise our principles. And these are the people that I've worked with. There was one paper I worked with where, and one of the reasons I quit was they did want to do stories on their advertisers. And I wasn't having any of that. I mean, that's not, we publish the paper for the readers, not for the advertisers. That's my mantra. The advertisers help pay for it, but that's somebody else's job. So I don't have to deal with that.
I'd like to address that if I could. I think you've asked such an important question. I think this is huge, a huge part of our discussion. And in my view, it's not well understood. What you were talking about can advertisers influence the news, that happens. I'm mindful, if those of you who've been around here long enough might remember a flap, I want to say it was the early 90s, and it was about a series of stories that started to get published in the Mail Tribune about alleged shady practices by a car dealer here. And I'm going to guess, and John Darling's here, he might correct me, I don't know, that the auto group are the most important advertisers to the Mail Tribune and the papers here. And those stories were choked off. They were not allowed to finish the series because of the possible loss in advertising revenue. So it happens. And somebody wasn't doing their job in constructing that wall between news and ads. But I think that can distract us. And if we can imagine maybe a pie chart, of why is the major media organizations falling down on their jobs, not giving us the information we need to function as citizens in a democracy. I think a small slice of that would be conflict or concern with advertising revenue. And another really small slice would be, this varies from time to time, but a small slice would be the ownership of the paper has an ideology or belief or an interest that would be threatened. So you don't do stories on Wall Street shenanigans because your corporation has banking interests, also owns banks on Wall Street, and those would hurt you. A lot of people think that's what suppresses news, and it's in there too, but I think those are too small slices. And then take 80%, I'm making the numbers up, and that slice is called, let's get this news out as cheaply as possible to maximize profit. So it shows up in 1,000 ways. Jason said the two stories that dominated the 90s, and he's accurate, were O.J. Simpson and Clinton's sex story. Those were almost cost-free stories for magazines, newspapers, and the broadcast news to put out every day. The story didn't change very much from day to day. They could find some new gossipy nugget and put it on the front page, and that was the story. A huge part of this problem are stories that we have no idea exist. And to get them, we need investigative journalism. We need bureaus in countries around the world, and all the organizations have viewers of those. Those are expensive. We need to be able to say to our local journalists like John Darling, this is an important enough story, go take a week to do this story. I'm going to guess John hasn't heard those words. So that, I want to say that the colossal problem has to do with the corporatization of our news, such that those who make, and it's difficult to talk about the media because there are so many different kinds. What I'm about to say doesn't much apply to Bert and applies not at all to Jason. But news organizations, decisions used to be made by journalists, by people with not pure human beings, but people whose driving, the reason they got up in the morning was to go out and give us the news we need to be citizens of a democracy. Now, the news that commands the largest market shares have decisions made by accountants and bean counters and people who excel in minimizing overhead in order to maximize profit. And we can't get the news we need. It's not so much that we can't understand the rest of the world if we don't have good journalism there. We can't understand what goes on in our own community. We can't have journalists go out and find the unlikely source who they don't know about at the beginning of the story. They have to go find. They can go to the president's press conference, the mayor's press conference, take the press release that's delivered to them, reword it a little for free. So I could go on and on, but the problem we face, in my view, is very much an economic one. It has to do with the corporate mandate to maximize return to shareholders, rather than it does people suppressing views that they don't like, or even car dealers coming in and beating up publishers for allowing stories to run that they don't like.
So, Hannah, do you have any thoughts on this?
Not really in the same context as they were talking about. What I can say is, I saw during the election a lot of fake news stories of satire being spread around because of this thing we like to call clickbait, because they had these catchy headlines. They're like, you wouldn't believe what Trump just did, and these sites were generating all this ad revenue because they had these insane headlines that that even I fell for sometimes, I hate to admit. But they had these cool headlines, and you had to read it, and then you'd get halfway through the story, and there wouldn't even be anything, really any content there that's factual at all. And that's how these sites were, breaking ground and getting all this revenue from people. And that's another thing that just comes down to, checking your sources and knowing who's trustworthy and who's not. That's all I really had to add.
So, Jason?
Oh, just quick, I wanted to talk about my experience, and then maybe on the earlier question. But I worked 12 years ago, worked for the Mail Tribune in the advertising department, and at that time it was right before Craigslist destroyed everything. But the advertising, the advertising was very important. It was, and the news, and to us, was like kind of like maybe a department of advertising. I mean, not that we were dictating. It was like we were doing the real work, and I'd go upstairs and where the news department, and nobody would be there, and I'd steal coffee. But I think it was there was a lot of energy put into the advertising, into generating revenue, building these special sections that could basically, so we can sell more revenue. There were the folks in the news department were writing content for these special sections that we could sell the revenue. I worked in my department. I worked in the syndicated ads, and I personally did over millions of dollars in ads every year. These would be the car ads and stuff. Our market was very valuable to big advertisers, and it really was, that's where the energy is. It's not like the ad department is dictating what the news is. It's just that's where all the emphasis was getting that ad revenue. So maybe John was working on great stories, but we just didn't care whatever you guys were doing. We just wanted to sell ads. And just really quickly on, talking about Jerusalem and meals and the others. We have in our own community here, we're doing a really great job at creating the others in our homeless community and in our traveling community. And just wanted to quickly do a shout out for our Friday community piecemeal, which we've been doing amazing work creating the community and creating the bonds within the others, within our homeless and within our house community and everyone. And so food is really a great way to start building that. And,
Jason and Vanessa, and many of us know, HCPC is involved in various ways, but do an incredible job of really providing care and compassion for the people who are on the street. Fridays in particular, but the sheltering, and so thank you very, very much. Really mean it. Where's Vanessa? Vanessa, where are you? Oh, there you are. Vanessa, yes. So, and it's a good question in terms of money and the whole dynamic here, because, and that's a bigger question, David. A huge question around, as you evolve to a culture of peace, and part of it is what is that, and it's evolving continually because we're all discovering what that is. It's not that, go do that, it's the continued evolution, but a huge part of that is money. What does that look like? Well, how is the dynamic of economics and money? That's a huge one. But we're going to tackle that whole thing. And I have a question just in terms of, we're talking about what is, what has been, and the dynamics of media and media people, and the good news and the bad news about that. Now, I'm also wondering about moving forward, because we're talking about, overarching, we're talking about a culture of peace. And how does the media assist that happening? How does the media assist that evolution? And so part of it is just reporting on what is, it seems to me, because reporting on what is just not changing. Part of it is also the media is promoting good stories. I mean, Bert has done an incredible job locally with the articles of the Ashland Cultural Peace Commission, that focus every 2 weeks, and it's just been incredible, and doing this right here. But I'm just wondering the bigger picture, we're looking forward 50 years, 100 years, I don't know what, but what is the role of media, media people to advance the culture of peace, to enhance that? So I'll begin with David. What are your thoughts on that?
Never before in the history of humanity has it been so possible for people to be connected with the rest of the world. The internet and all the associated, the travel that people can do, the incredible amount of travel that we can do, communication systems that people have, the ability to link up with each other. To me, this is where we're going. I assume this is going to continue, although I fear that the present empire in which we exist right now is crashing. And as it crashes, a lot of the communication and travel methods that we have available now may become more problematic. We need to find ways that we can sustain our communication and our solidarity locally and internationally in the face of an economic collapse. I have a special take on this because before I worked at the UN, I was a laboratory scientist and something of a star in my field, in brain research. And
David, could you repeat that? You cut out a bit. Repeat that, please.
Before I went to work at the UN, I did the brain research and was something of an international star, so I could set up labs everywhere in the world. And I decided to set up labs in the old Soviet Union. And working in the Soviet Union and speaking Russian, I watched an empire collapse from inside. And it collapsed because of the arms race. Whereas the West devoted 40 or 50% of its science and engineers to military and military-related themes, the Soviet Union devoted either 90%. There was nothing left. I couldn't establish a lab. I couldn't get what I needed for a lab. I had a Russian friend who had a good lab. I said, "How did you get that lab?" He said, "Because I had friends in the military." And I could go on with other stories like that, but they crashed. The culture of war is not sustainable. They had a culture of war, and in the competition between the West and the East, they lost. And they crashed. With the increased military budget in this country right now, the failure to be able to export anything, importing as we do, the system's going to crash, economically first. You talk to bankers. I talk to bankers when I travel. How many more years does the dollar have as the dominant currency of the world? And they say a couple. Because they don't look further into the future for a couple of years. So we need to develop resilient systems. I love the internet, and that's what I do. What are we going to do if the internet goes down? We need alternatives. We need methods to be in communication throughout the world when systems crash. And I don't have an answer to that. I think that if we put this question out to the young generation who are interested in technology, they can come up with ways we can stay in contact.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Anybody moving forward? Oh, yeah, yes, please. And loud, please.
Okay. So, my name is Mingpa, and I'm a student in
A
Native
little louder, please.
Louder, please.
Louder. So, my name is Mingpa, and I'm a student in Native American Studies. And the question that I have a question and a comment. The question is, I saw the movie in Independent Film Festival this past weekend, 500, and it was about Guatemala Revolution.
500 years.
Yeah, and it was a very uplifting movie. They went through a humongous struggle with facing reciprocity for a genocide that had occurred in Guatemala, bringing the president that was responsible for the genocide to justice, then having an overturn by the 8 large companies in Guatemala to forcefully annul the decision. And then at the end of the film, they ended up ousting another president and removing them from power in an overall victory, but they're still going through struggle. So the question that I have is, based off of the comment that David made about why the UN removed the culture of peace, and when you face a defeat like that, when you face a situation where you're in some sort of peril and you've been working on something important and it has success, and then you have larger influence remove you as a result of that, how do you come back or move forward from that? Because many countries, many groups of people, many activists, many people moving in a benevolent flow are facing that right now. So based off of experience, how do you come back from that? What are the solutions to come back from that? I saw it in the movie, but I also wanted to hear feedback from him about it, or from anyone else in the panel as well.
So then just David, did you get that? Do you have a thought?
I'm sorry, maybe you could rephrase the question because it's difficult for me to hear. David, why don't you formulate what you do?
Well, I think basically it's, you know, when you're trying to, when you have forces that are overtaking your situation, and it's really kind of overwhelming forces, how do you deal with that? And how do you come back from that? How do you come back from an overwhelming
Defeat.
Yeah, defeat.
Reversal of the victory.
A reversal of a victory.
Well, I mean, what I was just saying about the present American empire is that it's not so powerful. Our job is to prepare an alternative because it's crashing. I'm not so scared of them because they're very vulnerable. And the question is, are we preparing a new world to replace the one that's crashing? And that's our job. That's why we have peace commissions. And that's why we have alternative media.
Okay, you have a gentleman back here. Oh, go ahead, follow up.
And so the comment that I wanted to
Why
make
don't you come up here so you can hear?
Yeah, okay.
Please. So you can just come on in front.
Yeah, no problem.
It's loud so everyone else can hear.
All right, so the comment that I had to finish the question is not based off of the question that I asked, but it was just something that I've observed is when people miss the teaching element, when the teaching element is missed from journalism, meaning when it's lacking in journalism, then journalism just becomes gossip. And that people really need to focus on the teaching element and the educational element of journalism. When that is the focus, then the outcome is really amazing and it affects everybody in a beautiful way. But when the teaching element is lacking in journalism, it's just gossip. And people are just like gluttony oriented about information.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, David?
Well, I mean, I think that our panel has already taken on this question because it's a very important question. That we need investigative journalism, we need independent journalism, and it takes a lot of time and work.
Right. Okay. There's a question back here, please.
Yeah.
Stand up, please.
Yeah, so as a media, well, I'll start off by saying I have a radio show at the same station where Jason works at KSKQ called Farm
And
Talk.
what's your name, please?
Dave Munson. And to respond to what this gentleman just said, I have to say that as a media group, you have a choice on what you're going to report on, what you're not going to report on, what sections of your paper or news organization you're going to have. So you do have an opportunity to educate, and you're not just an objective reporter. You're choosing what you're covering and what you're not covering. So you have a huge influence over the people that listen to your media. And the point that I wanted to make, and I was waiting for the right moment to interject it, is I've been doing farm talk radio for 4 years, interviewing farmers and talking about local food independence and building community strength and preparing for the future by having local food sources and the ability to survive within our own bioregion here. And then over this winter, I decided to change the theme of my show to good news, inspiring news, solution-based kind of things. And because I realized that I'm pretty sure it's probably intentional that the mainstream media with Trump dancing around in the middle of it is somewhat intentionally there to distract us, frustrate us, just produce the standard disempowerment, crazy and disempowered American people kind of reality. So I am one extreme. I refuse to even look at it. I don't have the stomach for it. And when I tell people I don't look at mainstream media and hear what sort of nuts, crazy things Trump's up to, they're like, yeah, you're lucky. It's good you don't, because you wouldn't like it. So, and I don't think it would be okay for everyone to turn and look away, but I don't think we all have to be watching that. And so with my radio show, it's been a lot of fun. I've been going to a site called positive.news out of the United Kingdom, and they have just beautiful stories about inspirational things that governments, a lot of them in Europe, and some of them like the fact that India has a minister of happiness in India. That's a paid position. His job is to make sure that the happiness quotient in their country is good. And it's so wonderful to hear people as journalists investing their time in showing the way for a new world and for what we want to create in this planet. And I've heard many great speakers in the very recent times say, we can try to fight Monsanto's millions of dollars and their teams of lawyers, or we can get to work building the world that we want to have. And so, yeah, I think it's great as journalists to focus on the prize and where we want to get to and what we need to do to get there. And it seems like it's always about building community, and because when we get in trouble, I think it's when we don't know each other and we're fragmented. And so, anyway.
Great, thank you very much. What comes to mind is also Jeff. Because Jeff has immense possibilities, which most of us, or many of us, know about. Why don't you express about immense possibilities, why you do it, what it's about, and what your experience is, like he mentioned?
I was afraid I'd have to advertise myself, David, so thank you. I owe you a beer. Thank you for your comments. We've heard tonight about independent journalism and investigative journalism. I want to do a shout out for possibilities journalism, for the new world that people are creating. I would say it's a longer conversation. I sometimes hear people say, instead of opposing the major forces, let's go build the world we want. And I think in the world we're living in, both have to happen. I don't think we can just say, we'll let this rogue, amazing administration do what it's going to do, and then we'll go off and build what we're going to build. Both have to happen. But it's not realistic, putting aside the administration. Many of us want Americans at large to do things differently, to do the transportation and food and voting, all kinds of things, the impact that we have on the planet. And it's not realistic to ask people to change unless some alternatives are provided. It's just none of us really want to do that. We're going to stick with what can sustain us and keep us alive. And So I do think, and David said something very similar to this a few minutes ago. You know, what are we doing? I think David, you said something about preparing the institutions to replace those that are crumbling right now. And I absolutely think that's core to our jobs. And not only to do that in a sort of academic or theoretical way, but to show, and it's what the core of what we try to do in our program, show the satisfaction and joy that's available to people who are creating those alternatives. Rather than, you know, we sometimes have had the notion that this kind of work, community work, public work, civic work, is a drudgery or boring or a bunch of meetings. But what I've tried to do in my program is to bring on people who are on fire with a passion for building a new world in one way or another, in the belief that that passion is contagious. On our website, we enshrine a quotation from the Reverend Howard Thurman, which you may have heard. Otherwise, I've heard it more and more and more since I put it up there. And he said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and then do that, because what the world needs is people who come alive. So that's, to me, that was an epiphany. And I based the show on people who come alive and who are articulate or somehow eloquent about describing that. And so we are showing a number of things that happen that I think are constant with the culture of peace. We are respecting and elevating new takes on how to do things. We are bringing people together, or not we, these projects, my guests are bringing people together who otherwise would not have any interaction and might have disagreed a lot on certain issues. You know, whether if we have a group doing something about homelessness, something about food crisis, the work you're doing on building local food systems, all of these involve people who have really different views on Donald Trump, on what's happening in the world, on social issues, gay rights, you name it. And we've tried, and I've tried forums where you bring in people with different views and you say, well, let's talk about these issues, and that can be done. That can be a disaster. It can be an interesting evening that doesn't have much follow-up because people come in and they don't have much relationship. And it takes relationship in order to drop your preconceptions enough to really want to learn what is motivating somebody who feels differently. That's not likely to happen before I care about you. If I don't care about you, I'm defending my position, I'm rehearsing my old script, and I'm only barely listening to a different point of view. If you and I have done community projects together that we both care about, that changes the whole game. So there are all kinds of benefits to going out and featuring and being curious about new ways of doing things and giving time in our programs and in our air. I'm going to go home and check out this website we just talked about, which I didn't know about, to people who are pioneering new paradigms for doing things.
Along that line, we asked Hannah along what Jeff was talking about, because oftentimes in here, young people see things really differently and approach things or want to approach them really differently. You're right there. And what is your thought about this line of conversation?
And that's definitely true. We have a different approach to things, but I mean, I found myself agreeing with a lot of the things you were just saying. I mean, I think as journalists, we do have a lot of power to tell people what's newsworthy and what's important, and I think it's, our responsibility to offer those counter narratives and asking what if instead of just telling people what is. Being a younger journalist, I mean, just with the Siskiyou too, I always find myself encouraging students to go out and find feature stories and find what's good in the community instead of coming to me and wanting to just bash other people for being Greek life and people not wanting to study Greek life. And a lot of kids, they have these, they come in, they want to just gossip and they want to write these editorials and talking about each other. And as much as fun as that is sometimes, I like to encourage, them to go and find a professor that does really cool stuff that we don't know about, or find a student that's doing incredible things and write about that, because we do have a lot of pews that are doing these awesome things, doing research, and promoting, sitting on panels, doing these cool things that not a lot of people know about, especially, fellow peers that you sit in class with don't know. And so I encourage that to, find positive things and spread that around our community. And that starts a lot, that good positive news starts locally and not necessarily on a national level.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Emily Eckhart, and I'm a student here through SOU's Honors College. And we've been talking a lot about making sure that our voices as the general public are heard, but I'm not in any journalism, anything. I'm not a part of the Siskiyou. I'm not involved in any journalism production at all. So I'm just a science major. So how do I make my voice heard? How do I make sure that my truth is heard within the community?
Show up at panel discussion.
I was just going to say, come here.
Now that actually ties in pretty well with what I've been thinking about. There's been some great topics that have been covered, from emphasizing, humanizing other people, doing solutions-based journalism, not picking stories that are full of BS. But another part that is important is that the news consumer has to make decisions and has to support institutions that it gets value from. Right now we don't have at KSKQ, but JPR is doing their annual fund drive. And of course they're talking a lot about Trump's cut of funding proposed cut for Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which does public TV and as well as the radio, and that's a significant chunk. So you can write your congressman, call him, tell him not to do that. You can support the radio station and not go for the clickbait. I think this came up in a conversation I had with David the other day. Breakfast cereal. In the you go down the aisle and there's 120 different kinds of cereal and whatnot. And I remember when I was a kid, there was this study came out and it said, oh my God, half of the cereal is sugar. And so people started adjusting to make more, with information, they make more intelligent decisions. And so don't get the news that's full of sugar. Get something with some good fiber, with some good information in it, and some solutions, hopefully, too. Throw some of those in there. So.
What is your name?
Emily.
Emily, thank you for your question. I think it's great. I'd say there's an individual way to put your voice out and a collective way to put your voice out. And I actually think we have quite a few opportunities, an unusual amount of opportunities to get our voice out as individuals. Bert would be happy to publish you a letter in the Tidings. And it used to be, I don't know if it's still true, that the most read part of a newspaper was the letters to the editor. And it can trigger wonderful conversations. Obviously that happens online a lot right now in ways, I'm not shy about reading rough stuff, but my brain hurts after I read some of the online forum stuff. But that gets lots of circulation. I think it's an interesting challenge for those of us who believe in a culture of peace to try to steer some of those online forums to peaceful conflict, disagreement that honors people. So those all of us have available. Bert has made guest opinions, more than letters, longer pieces, available to many people. People like the Tidings more and more. So that's really available to anybody. We hope you do that. Those get read. Those definitely get read. The other thing is, a lot of impact can result from that. But I think by and large, maybe more impact happens when we find people who share a view we want to put forward and organize with them. And God knows there's a lot of that out there. You know, if you started talking about, you know, the one or two things that are most important to you in the world and how you feel about them, chances are really good that there's a group, if not locally, online, where you can add your strength. And it might be your strength to lobby politicians, which is really important. One of the really good news things right now is people are realizing that properly approached, that enough citizen voices coordinated in a smart way really make a difference. I mean, that's always been true. But it takes, this is another night's conversation perhaps, but besides having passion when you express yourself to elected officials, it takes coherence and more than anything tenacity, which is what we haven't been good at. So I would say, you know, if you want to put out your voice as an individual, there are like 5 or 6 different ways to do that. If you wanted to have an impact in the society, find fellowship with people who feel the way you do, and find out what they're doing already and see what you can add to it.
Just build on that real quick. You know, KSKQ is always looking for folks to put their voice on the air. I'm so amazed at the age we live in and the ways that you can get your voice out, you know, through the radio, through the media, through the internet, YouTube channels. You can create memes, you can start a Facebook page. But to agree with what you said, you know, being able to find an audience and to build the audience, I was thinking of one of the recent campaigns here in the Rogue Valley that were really successful was the campaign to ban GMO crops. And that was an example of a real David and Goliath case. And that was done, with, you know, it was not a 9-to-5 journalist, it was, you know, the farmers out there that, you know, spent countless hours and sleepless nights finding out the details and building, you know, building the case and getting the news out. And there's just an amazing, and to me it seems that it's maybe not the traditional journalist but maybe we can crowdsource some of this activity. It's going to be the real true believer, like some of us here that are just got to get to the truth and will not rest until they find it.
Yeah. And I was wondering, just in terms of, you know, journalists, and John Darling, one of our, you know, journalists extraordinaire here in the Valley, and you use a lot of different media. What questions, thoughts, comments would you have in this conversation?
Well, I'm just a daily journalist, and I write stories a couple a day and just try to get the truth out there. And I use Facebook a lot because I can say what I want, and that's okay with my editors so far. And so I'm really incensed to what the Americans voted for. Well, only 19% voted for him, but it was enough. And I've really been scared and angry, and I've reported a lot of stories about what people are doing politically, and a lot on Indivisible and all that. And so I always tell my girlfriend, Anne, send a story out for 5 minutes, we say. And I say, another blow for liberty. So, almost all my stories do convey information that people can use. And that they go, gee whiz, that person is doing that. And I think I report a fire or a crime or crash about every 2 years. And I'm really happy with that. And it's the Tidings that really takes care of that end of the spectrum. And I did a parody on the Mail Tribune last year, where I said, you open up the Mail Tribune and it says, drive-by shooting. and you open up the tidings and it says, people are changing the world for the better. And I think that's the difference between Ashland and Medford, frankly. And I mean, you step outside of Ashland and you're in red country. And that's why I don't step outside of Ashland.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, back here, please. Please.
Oh, yeah, hi, thanks.
Loud, please.
My name is Leif, and thanks for having this gathering. Thank you, David, for joining us. And I saw a bumper sticker recently that said, "At least the war on the environment is going well." So I'm tempted to ask David what personal measures he's taking to prepare for this crash, but I'm going to try to stick with the media subject. And with the last election, there was all this circus in the ads, and the CEOs were laughing all the way to the bank, cynical about how popular and theatrical this was. And I've always wondered if you can help me, this panel, help me understand why the candidates need war chests to run a race, and the war chest is used for ads. And how is it that the broadcast media, corporate broadcast media, controls the elections in such a way that it's $1, one vote? Something like that. Thanks. Your thoughts?
Boy. First.
And let me just bring it to David. The comment was also on, candidates having a war chest to run their campaigns and so on. And part of that is the languaging that we have that stays with us. So many of the, conflict, war images or languages that we use, and it become, part of our culture. In culture, there it is, Any thoughts on just that aspect of it, David?
Well, two things. One is, he asked also a question, how do we prepare for the coming problems? But about language, I agree with the perspective that Jeff has presented, that we need to see the value in conflict sometimes. We're not going to achieve peace without being conflicted, one of my favorite quotations was from Martin Luther King. He said, "The supreme task is mobilize the anger of the people into a transforming force."
But say it again, please.
The supreme task is to mobilize the anger of the people into a transforming force. So I agree with Jeff. We're not looking for, we're not trying to be peaceful in the sense that there is no conflict. No, we are struggling for values that Bert has described, which are the values of the Culture of Peace Commission. That means we have to fight for these values. Fight in the deep sense of struggle for something. It's not easy. Anyway, I just wanted to say I agree with that. I'm not sure if I've clearly stated what you said, Jeff, but you can comment on it. And as far as how we prepare, we are preparing precisely the things we're doing here tonight. Alternative media, youth commissions in cities. Cities don't have a culture of war. They have not had a culture of war for many centuries. We have no borders to defend, no military contacts, no arms. And in the Peace Commission, I was at the Board of Education tonight, even representing the Peace Commission. There is no problem in our city all the values that we have in a peace commission. This is the business of a city. We need peace commissions in every city, both in the United States and around the world. That kind of institutional framework we need to be building. And the alternative media and all of this is absolutely crucial. So that's what we need to do. We need to be doing more of what we're doing tonight.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate that. Comments on the comment?
Well, you open up a whole new can about money and politics and all of that, which many of us think is the linchpin that we can't make progress on the individual issues we care about unless we do can solve that the way that money's corrupted our politics. As far as ads and that whole obviously the most easiest, most way to reach lots of people is through media, and in this country through television, and that's why the broadcasters get the lion's share, and that's why elections have become so enormously profitable to the larger, especially broadcast and television media. That the whole world of how to reach voters is radically changing really fast, and there's the building trends about how more and more we spend on advertising every election have changed already. Obama changed that a lot in 2008. Still, social media is changing that as fast as, how do you reach the people you want? The targeted marketing, all that, the technology is changing that very fast. But one, in terms of solutions, there has been for decades a major media reform movement in this country that isn't well enough known, and I want to give out a couple website addresses before we leave. But one of the major proposals over time, and it's even come forward in proposed bills in Congress, would require broadcasters to provide quite a bit of free time, unpaid time, to candidates, local level, presidential candidates, local level, with formats that are different from the circuses we've seen in these debates, that would justify their licenses to broadcast, which still, in theory, have to happen in the public interest. And now this media has diversified so much that this is less important than it used to be, but it's still pretty important. Television broadcasters get a license that talk about service to the public interest, and they renew those licenses. And any number of people have said, you know what you got to do? You got to give up a small portion of your ad time to let people in communities and all the way up from cities all the way up to national see their candidates on the air. And it's a bit different in print. But there are still, every time a bill like that comes up, it doesn't get out of committee because of the strength of the broadcasters. And there are people who write about these things who say, of all of the lobbies in DC, no one strikes as much fear in the hearts of the legislators as the broadcast industry because of what they can do to political figures. So one of the, in the vein of solutions, there are a number of well-crafted proposals to get free broadcast time for candidates in ways that people are liable to see and that might really make a substantial difference in the quality of our elections.
Would you be so kind as to mention those websites?
Yes, there are two I want to mention in particular, and these are, there are a lot of wheels we don't have to reinvent. There are a number of people working on this for a long time, and there's some really good potential solutions out there. One is called Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR, F-A-I-R, and it's fair.org. And the other is Media Matters, and it's mediamatters.org. If this is an area of interest, please check out the websites. You'll find a tab on both of them that say action. And they're really, in my view, pretty well-grounded, practical organizations. And the problems we face are, they're national, they're international, and lots of good people have been trying to figure this out.
Yes.
My name is Elizabeth Austin, and what I have to say is that in this room, there are amazing intellectual people. There is so much resource right here. The questions that have been asked have been so insightful. I am so sorry that Emily has left. I am too. Oh my goodness. She asked the question that I would have asked in a few minutes. What can we, as just people who are not journalists, who are citizens, who want honest reporting, good journalism, what can we do? And you've answered that to a great extent, and I'm grateful. If anybody in this room leaves without some idea of what you can do, I would be shocked, because it's here. And if Emily were here, she should go talk to every one of you and give you her name. And so I'm sorry she's left. And thank you for what you're doing. And if there's something that we need to do to support you, we need to know what it is. You need to tell us so we can do it. Because I believe that the people here will actually do it. And the people here, if you haven't checked out the Ashland Culture of Peace Commission, please do. Because there are really energized folks who may be somebody you want to talk to. Get something done.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get to that before we adjourn.
I just want to say that I see a culture of participation rising, right after the inauguration, that march we had there.
Yeah.
We've never had anything like that before. And we have marches coming up.
Yeah.
And so I just think this is one of the very hopeful changes that we're seeing.
Well, it's interesting, I think, what David said, but one of the things we can do is more of this.
Yes, yes.
And Joyce, what you're trying to get at? Joyce?
I just wanted to make the point that free time was available up until about 1980 when that was wiped out. This is not something new that we're asking for. That was, I was in radio in those days, and equal time was absolutely sacrosanct. You could not imagine not allowing anybody to stand up and speak. So
I'd like to reframe that along those same lines with the fairness doctrine. As Jeff put it, and accurately enough, but they need to give up some of their ad time, for people to have their voice. But that's our space. I mean, the whole precept of that is that there are public airwaves, that is the commons, that is our space that they're using.
Mm-hmm.
And they've bought or rented that space, but it's our space. It's public lands, if you will, although it's a broadcast spectrum. And so they're using it, but they're using it with our permission and allocated by the government and all that. So we have every right and expectation. It's not a privilege that they hand us back a little sliver of that. It's our right to use that. And getting back to the point about the money and politics, which is related, I guess, is the Citizens United decision, which allows people to pump money in without disclosing who they are, which is just insane. I mean, you need whatever we can do to have more transparency so that the money in politics is divulged. I mean, okay, if they're going to spend it, fine, but at least say who you are, so you can find out what somebody's agenda is and make informed decisions again about who to support and what direction we should be going in as a broader society.
David, can I say something? Under the heading of what can I do, you can subscribe to the Tidings. It's online in a paper edition. I think about 1 in 10 people in this town do that. And supporting good journalism is very important and very cheap, actually. About the cost of a latte a month. So I know how many of you subscribe to it. So stop doing that.
You know what?
So two of the three things that I wrote down of what to do have been mentioned. I got to plug fair.org and mediamatters.org if you want to check out the national movement. John just mentioned the second. So financially support the media that you find worthwhile. We got one right here. KSKQ really makes $1 travel a long way, and is putting out a lot of diverse voices and a lot of important news. Same, the Tidings too. Democracy Now! Gets my dollars every year. So really seek them out and support them financially. And the third would be tell them and tell the world, as best you can, when you don't like and when you like what they're doing, very specifically. If you see stories or, months of sensational coverage of something that, the sugar that somebody was talking about, or heroin, whatever it is, that complain with letters with friends to the decision makers, to editors, whoever. Write letters to the editor. Tell them that they are feeling their responsibility to inform us as citizens of democracy. And maybe more important, catch them doing something right. When I get surprised by a story, it doesn't surprise me to see, here's a really good story in KSKQ, so I don't do it. But if I see something in the conventional newspapers that I think is just really an important story done well, I write them and I call the editor. And sometimes I'll write a letter to the editor. And I'm surprised that, I don't know this, but I believe that that's powerful. I believe that getting caught, just like when we get caught doing something right, or when our kids do, if you tell editors and assignment editors and other decision makers, this is great, more of this, please, this is what I need, I think that can be really powerful. And if you do social media, encourage your friends to do the same.
I'm wondering, we're getting close to our conclusion time. Yes.
I would like to ask Hannah if there's something that we can do to support you, because I really have enjoyed your input as a younger person in charge of a newspaper and a university. Is there anything we can do to support you in your search for good journalism?
Well, thank you for that question. Not necessarily. Like, I liked all what they were saying of just being engaged and reading the news. I love it when I see Siskiyou views go up and it's mostly students. I love when that happens, because us kids my age, they aren't as engaged as they should be, as I want them to be. So just read the paper. And what Jeff was saying, to go off that, I do believe we vote with our money, and we vote with who we give our money to. So subscribe to the news sources that you trust and that you think are trustworthy. And yes, tell them when they're doing something good. I love getting emails when I do write for the Tidings and I write about community events. I love getting those emails saying, thank you for writing about this. This was well written. I'm glad the community knows about it. Because that really is, it keeps the fire burning. And it knows that I am on the right path and I'm doing something that matters, and that's important. So I do like getting fan mail sometimes.
Who do we tell that you did something good tonight?
What was that?
Who should we tell that you have done something really good tonight?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, think of somebody, we'll tell them.
Yeah.
We're telling you you're doing a great job tonight.
And the Siskiyou does have a website, which is?
Yes, siskiyou.edu.sou.edu.
Okay.
So please, yes, please read us. We cover community events, but mostly SOU and Ashland.
Editorials? Opinions?
Yes, we welcome editorials. That's kind of hard to squeeze out of kids sometimes to get them to write those, but we do. I love running op-eds when we can.
So we're coming close to our conclusion time.
Could I please put in a little plug for some of the networking that I've noticed in the International Film in the Independent Film Festival. Some of the most successful movements have been the farm workers movement. We saw that with Dolores Huerta in that movie, and also in terms of what happened in Guatemala. They weren't using the same kind of media. They were communicating with each other through community networks. A lot of those people don't even read, and they put their bodies on the line. and they learned how to come together as in a tribal way. So I just want to make that point. And I'd also like to suggest that here locally, I am one of the people that works at Peace House, and we do have a network that you can look at online. Go to peacehouse.net and you'll see a calendar of events. And when you're wanting to know what to do, and you look at that calendar, you can pick out any one of several events to go and participate in, find a community that's connected to those events, and put your body wherever you want. But use Peace House in that way. We have a quarterly, we put out news about things on our quarterly, and we send out spotlights about things that are happening. So Peace House has been around for 35 years. I think we helped to midwife culture of peace. We're completely happy to have culture of peace and Peace House working together. And I think it says a lot about our community that we can have two networks like that that are interfacing with each other. So thank you all for what you're doing, and don't forget about Peace House either.
Right, sure. So, long-standing in the community.
35 years.
Yes.
Could I just follow for just a minute? I've talked a lot, but I want to say one more thing, because I was really inspired at the film festival by Dolores and the Guatemalan stories. And this relates for me to your question earlier about what happens when you win, you make progress, and then there's a reversal. Just about all of the major transformational movements we can think of, definitely the farm workers, you know, getting the Mayan finding a survivable life in Guatemala, in our own history, abolition, suffrage, you know, civil rights movement, are just stories of so many setbacks. And what, you know, I feel like we're being tested as a people as we never have before. And, you know, my generation had it pretty easy. And the downside of that is we get frustrated and we give up pretty quickly. So we are being called upon. This is one of those setbacks, this election, when we thought we made some progress on things like climate and other things. We are being called on to test our tenacity and persistence and determination, like I think in no time that I can remember. And so it's really a matter of getting together, organizing, getting with people who believe as you do. We can't do it without the strength of one another, and going back again and again and again. And there are wonderful examples through our history of movements that won when they've been able to do that.
Great. So I'll just continue with that as kind of a concluding comment. So thank you, Jeff.
That's Mark.
And how about to begin with Hannah, concluding thoughts?
Concluding thoughts. I pretty much think I covered everything I wanted to talk about. I'm really grateful to be here to have my voice heard, and thank you for wanting to hear me. Like I covered in the beginning, I just want to re-emphasize to read sources you trust and to find that news that you enjoy reading and celebrate it and celebrate other people's experiences even though it's different from your own, and know that they came from someplace else, and we all come from different places, but that working together in that collaboration and that peace is possible. We just have to understand each other.
Bert, how would you go last? So Jason and then David.
All right. Well, just you know, our society is just so immersed in media messages, and I think that a critical piece of this is going to be the education and being able to tell the difference, being able to analyze media critically. That's going to be I think the topic of Mickey Huff's lecture. He's going to be in this space on Friday, so I encourage everyone to come join us on Friday. Director of Project Censor, he's going to be talking about that. I always think of you know what. I guess that's all I have. I guess one last thought is when we're creating content, you know, it's real important for us as media creators and storytellers to give people calls to action and always, you know, ask what am I supposed to do with this information. And so that's, I think, we need to do is try to make clear what we expect people to do, and what their next step is, like coming to Mickey Huff's lecture on Friday.
Like you just did.
Thank you.
What time is the lecture?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock here. So I would just say, just in my conclusion, I'm delighted, and I've learned various things from this experience in our conversation. One of the things that stands out also from what you said, David, was about cities. You know, what's going on in other cities, and they've been a proponent of it, having cultures of peace in other cities, and that's actually part of our overall mission also. But it's like connecting with the different media or independent media in other cities, and really engaging in sharing stories or reinforcing the good news, or that seems like that's a real powerful way to go too. So, David, your concluding thought.
Well, I want to come back to the United Nations. My experience at the United Nations is that if the United Nations were run by states, it could make peace in the world. As I mentioned, the 75 million people that were willing to be engaged. Don't have time to tell you about the programs we ran in El Salvador, Mozambique, to bring countries out of civil war. We knew how to do it. We could do it in the UN, but the nation state that run the UN did not want it. If we had a UN run by cities, we could make peace in the world. I'm absolutely convinced.
The United Nations run by cities.
Yeah, not countries.
Not countries. So, Bert, you started this whole thing.
And I'm glad I did. Thank you all for being here and for caring and showing up and sharing your thoughts and suggestions. I think it's been great. A couple little things. That Peace House calendar is just great. I subscribe to the email newsletter, and nothing gets by them. It keeps me informed, and it helps with my story selection, actually. The Tidings online is about a quarter a day, so you can subscribe. If you don't want to get the paper thing, you can just subscribe online and subscribe to the online edition. Nothing gets done unless people care about things, so I think that this is great that you showed up, and I care passionately about getting the information out here, and I think we're all a community of interest. There's, and along the lines of accurate information, there's another march coming up on April 22nd, Earth Day. There's the Science March, and it's people, again, not being against something, but being for something. And they're being for knowledge and for information. And I think that's what brought us all here tonight, and I plan to be there.
Also,
Thank you.
The 29th is a climate march. That's a People's March for the Climate the following Saturday.
All righty. So, how about, let us stand up.
Yeah.
And let's applaud everybody. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Dave. So can you still, there you go. Now I can talk to you directly.
Okay. Yeah,